It started with a laugh. I was getting ready for the day in my room. At that point in time, I was in therapy and I was seeing a psychiatrist for depression and anxiety, and I was on medication. And so I was getting ready for the day in my room. I was home alone, no music on, no TV. And from the back corner of my room, I heard a man snicker at me, just this mean laugh. It was so brief, but crystal clear. And I panicked. Thankfully, I really trusted the psychiatric nurse practitioner that I was seeing, so I told her about it. And she made her notes, and we talked about it in therapy and carried on. And then more things started happening. There was the sound of a guitar being strummed just once. Again, home alone, no music, no TV, no explanation. From there, it moved on to footsteps up and down the hallways, the sound of horse hooves outside of my window, creaking sounds, music, all sorts of things like that. And it became so overwhelming, all of these just different symptoms that were so unexplained, and all of the doctor's visits and pharmacies and new medications and things like that, that one day I was just trying to decompress. And so I was over at a house where I was pet sitting, and I'm lying on the couch watching TV with the dogs, and I've got my arm hanging off the edge of the couch, and I feel a cat sniff the back of my hand. I just feel the breath and the whiskers. And without looking, I reach out to pet it, and I can feel it sort of back away, and we go back and forth with me not looking still about 3 or 4 times before I remember that they don't have a cat. I panicked and I called my doctor, and it was at this point that my doctor's language started to change. She started talking about it and how we can approach it and different methods of treating it. And finally, my mom and I, who was sitting on the couch with me, leaned forward and we asked, "What is it?" She said, "It's looking to be schizophrenia." In the office, I was actually very calm, because this was actually, in a way, great news to me, because this meant that this wasn't something that I was just some bad person who had something horribly wrong. This was an illness. This was something that other people experienced too. This is something that was treatable. And I was excited to have an explanation for these weird symptoms. But when we got in the car to go home, internally, I just fell apart, because in all of my knowledge of schizophrenia, I didn't know a single story about someone who was diagnosed at 17, right before their senior year of high school. And then they started high school and everything was great. And they went on to be, a state ranked high jumper, and they were valedictorian of their class, and everything was just fine, go on to a great college and all of that. No, all I knew were stories about people who were spending their lives in hospitals, or lived with their families, or couldn't work, couldn't have meaningful relationships. And I just panicked, because I didn't know what was going to happen to me. I was stable enough that they offered me inpatient but did not force me into it, and I said no, because I didn't want there to be an empty desk at school and have people start talking, because I went to a very small high school and I was afraid that rumors would start to get out, and that then people would find out that there was something wrong with me. And so then they offered me home hospital, which was a type of independent study that my school offered. And again, I said no for the same reason. And this kind of backfired on me, because instead I floundered in front of everyone. I struggled because I didn't know that schizophrenia also comes with disorganized symptoms, where my brain would make weird connections to things and make things that didn't make sense, or that my thoughts would get jumbled up or be completely inaccessible sometimes. I didn't know about the cognitive issues that come with it. I didn't know that I would have trouble with focusing, with processing, with memory, and that suddenly I would go from being one of the top students in my entire school to struggling just to memorize a formula in math class. I didn't know about the negative symptoms, or the fact that sometimes I would be unable to feel the feelings that logically I knew I should be experiencing, and that I felt logically but didn't feel in my body or feel emotionally. I didn't know about any of that, and so I struggled immensely. And I probably would have struggled even if I had known that, but it was extremely difficult not knowing that. Even though we bought books and we did our research, I didn't know what to expect. And that was really, really difficult. And I don't think anybody knows what to expect. I don't think you'll ever really understand it until you experience it for yourself. But I wish I had a little bit more education on it going into things. By the time I got the schizoaffective disorder diagnosis, I was seeing shadowy figures peering in my windows and around my doors at night. I was experiencing paranoia that people around me could hear or read my thoughts. And I was also experiencing a lot of disorganized thoughts and having just these weird connections that didn't make sense, like thinking that one day when I was out riding at the barn and I was jumping the horse, and then afterwards I was hosing the horse off because it was a hot day, and I saw a bit of white residue on her hoof, and I thought that's where the price tag was. You know, like when you peel off the sticky price tag and there's a little bit of residue left over. And that made perfect sense to me at the time. What I didn't realize until over an hour later was that it was actually just white paint from a jump that we had nicked. Now, the diagnosis was later changed to schizoaffective disorder, depressive type, because of the fact that though my depression had gone away at a certain point during the psychosis, it did come back. And so because I had periods of psychosis for over 2 weeks without any sorts of mood symptoms, but the depression did come back, and I had depression with psychosis and without the psychosis. That was why my diagnosis was updated to depressive type schizoaffective disorder. I've also never experienced mania or hypomania, and so that is why I was not diagnosed with bipolar type schizoaffective disorder, which is the other type of schizoaffective disorder. Now, after the schizoaffective disorder diagnosis, I felt even worse, honestly, at first, because I just come to terms with the schizophrenia diagnosis, kind of. I hadn't fully come to terms with it, but it was on the way there. And now suddenly I have this new diagnosis that I'd never heard of in my life before, and that nobody around me had heard of. How was I supposed to deal with this when I had just come to terms with this other one? And so it was really, really depressing. It made it very difficult to deal with, and it wasn't until probably at least a year later that I was able to really accept it and come to terms with it. And it wasn't until my sophomore year of college, maybe my junior year of college, when I first spoke publicly about it, that I began to feel really comfortable with my diagnosis and okay with the fact that I had depressive type schizoaffective disorder. So that's a little bit more about my initial experiences with depressive type schizoaffective disorder. Thanks, guys.